Iniziamo la parte dimostrativa della nostra pata
Let's
choux.
begin with the demonstration part of our choux pastry. We put our pot over heat. We're going to turn on the heat. We're going to add the water and we're going to insert the butter. Remember that in the beginning the temperature must be very, very low, the temperature of the heat, of course. A little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar, so as I was telling you, it is fundamental not to lose too much water or milk or water and milk. So low heat, let the butter melt, and then we can get to a boiling. Always remember, in this case we're using a 0 flour which has a medium strength. W is around 250, as the one we used for puff pastry. Always remember to sift it, even though you won't need it for the insertion, because when we use so much fat matter it's difficult that clumps can form, but we do it always to prevent. Always remember to break the eggs a little bit. Technically, when we insert eggs, it's always more or less a quantity of 1 whole egg at a time. Always wait that the egg you inserted has completely interacted with the mass, and then you can go with the next one. Clearly, if your recipe is very proportioned, you always use the same ratios and your process is always the same, you can also put all of the eggs together. But we are always doing this because sometimes we might change use a different recipe, a different balance, a different flour, which might have some values that during the years can change, because cultivations are not always the same. So every year we might have differences compared to the previous year. So in that case, we must go safe and so insert the eggs a little at a time, as it is possible that maybe we've let our base cook too much and we might have an even easier absorption. So the butter is melted, we're going to bring the temperature to a maximum. We are boiling in a quite important way. From here we're going to move. I'm going to pour the flour all together. I'm going to take a spatula right away and we're going to stir gently like this. And now we're going to start stirring and pushing. You can see that the starch of the flour has completely hydrolyzed. It has already produced part of the gel, because the density has increased a lot. We can notice it. Keep stirring like this. You can see that the first indicators that make us understand that we're almost ready are present. So the mass, as I stir, is detaching easily from the sides of the bowl. Constantly check that the base has a very uniform color, that there are no flour clumps that we haven't dissolved. So keep doing this. And then when we're going to start having a little bit more technique, we can also do everything directly over heat. In this beginning phase we advise you to turn off the heat and then to bring them back over heat in a second occasion. So stirring again and pushing, always gently. The flame is quite high, so you can always do this in and out game, so the casserole will keep the heat for quite a long time. And we can do this to avoid burning, to prevent it from burn. So, stirring and pushing, again outside of the heat. We can start seeing a whitish layer over the mass, and it starts clinging to the borders. Remember that it mustn't take any browning color. At the sides, in this area, we start having a first attaching phase of the product. So now, keeping stirring, we can notice in transparency a slight searing of the starch that is trying to come out, attaching to the sides of the casserole. So what we're going to do now is we're going to insert the mass directly in our planetary machine with the leaf to then step to the next preparation. So, taking our machine, putting the mass in it, and we're going to turn it on. Speed is medium, we don't need to use a high speed. And we're going to insert our eggs. So, a little bit goes in, and as you can notice, I'm waiting for the egg to be completely absorbed, so it will take a few seconds. Some more egg. Always check that the absorption rate of the mass is optimal, so as always, pushing the arm of the machine or lifting the bowl or turning the machine off and using the spatula. But in this case you're going to lose some time. Remember that the quantity of egg stages, insertions, depend on how much they are absorbing into the dough. The normal ratio is about 1 whole egg at a time. If you see that the base is attaching to the sides and the leaf can't catch them, can't catch the whole dough, just stop it and use your spatula. Last part of the egg, let it drip nicely, because a minimum quantity, lost quantity of ingredient might ruin the final product. Always remember not to be too slow, because if the dough cools down too much, the dressing shape you will obtain will not be optimal. So we're almost there. The last indicator, now clearly I'm noticing a mixture that's similar to a pastry cream. It must be very smooth, very velvety. If you notice these things, it means that it's finished. If you need to add eggs because you see that it's too rough, always use 1/3 or half of an egg at a time. Never add 1 whole egg, because it might loosen the base too much. So when you think it's ready, and the main indicators are suggesting you that it's ready, turn off the machine, lift the arm, and we're going to move it a little bit, like this. You can see we have a sort of, when the dough falls down, we have a sort of triangle shape. It means that more or less the density that you obtain is the right one, the correct one. If clearly we were wrong and we have a mixture that's too rough, we can add a little bit of egg. From here, we're going to insert our mixture directly in a pastry bag. We used a 10 nozzle or tip. I'm going to open it. Moving those things that we don't need. We're going to clean our leaf. And we're going to pour it in our pastry bag. Important thing, always, if you're opening the pastry bag to avoid the formation of air bubbles, always push a little bit of the pastry bag into the tip to prevent it from dripping. Never fill the pastry bag too much, remember this, because it is important to have the right pressure and the right control. So always fill it by half or a little bit more than half. Inserting the mass inside, avoid to let the mass go over the sides, the folded sides. And then we're going to start the dressing of the beignets, so the choux. Before seeing how to use the pastry bag, let's see two types of trays we might use. The first tray I'm going to show you is like this. It is important to see what we are using between the tray and the parchment paper. This is parchment paper. We fixed it to the base of the tray with some butter or sprayed butter. This is important because during the cooking we are avoiding for the fan of the oven to move our parchment paper and to therefore move or break our choux. Clearly, if we're doing this together, we advise you to always use a silicone mat, or even better, a silicone mat that has micro holes in it. This is important because, first of all, the raw choux will fix to the little holes of the silicone mat, improving the cooking. It will have a better adherence to the base, and so both the cooking and the development will be more optimal. So either silicone mat or silicone mat with micro holes, which is one we're going to use today for our demonstration. One last thing about this, always work on the sides, because as I said before, at a certain point the spray butter will melt and the fan might let the paper move. So work on the sides to give the right weight and to avoid any movement. Let's take our pâte choux, and we're going to have the last part of our video class. So if the dough you inserted is a little bit more compared to the half, you're going to choke it, so divide the dough by half, otherwise it's enough to do it only in the final part. So turning the pastry bag like this. Why am I doing this? So that I have a mixture that's more pressed and we have less air bubbles. The excess can be curled up on the finger, simply because it's just bothering. You can choose whatever, you can do whatever you want. The left hand, if you're left-handed, pushes in a fluid way without intermittencies, the more the mixture comes out fluidly, the less imperfections we will have. The left hand, sorry, I meant right hand before, and the left hand in this case is keeping the tip still. And when we have started squeezing, the pastry bag doesn't move up or down. So first mistake, when we move like this, so we're creating this. This is a product that during the cooking, clearly I exaggerated it, but just to understand, it will open. Another common mistake is this, when by pushing we do this, because I'm lifting the bag. Even if the perception is almost impossible to perceive, we must be very careful not to do this. So point the tip like this. I keep the tip very still. I push and avoid to do this towards up. Not because it's wrong to have a peak, you can always remove it. You can flatten it by wetting your finger with some water, but simply because if we have to build a dessert, as we did before, either croquembouche or profiteroles, the tips may disturb us during the assembling phase, and so at the end having a shape of the profiterole that's not completely pyramidal. So last demo, pushing, opening the end, and trying to detach towards the outside, limiting the formation of a tip. Once again, pushing, opening, detaching, pushing, opening, detaching. See, I can use my left hand like many ways. There are many people that, for example, do this. So there is not one right way to hold your pastry bag. Remember that the important part is that the left hand keeps the pastry bag as still as possible, and the right hand pushes. The more the push is uniform and homogeneous with a constant speed, the more we avoid the formation of imperfections. And this way we made the base of our mignons. If we want to make eclairs, we're going to work with the tip slightly diagonally, pushing and then sliding, pushing and sliding. Remember, especially in this case, we need a certain distancing between the products. Pushing, sliding. Remember that it is important in this case to manage to start our sac à poche and pastry bag work, leaving the right space between the products. If for any reason you have a silicone mat, it's a little bit lighter compared to this. So let's say that our tray is ready, and for any reason we have this border that has where we didn't put any product. If you have a little bit, not enough dough and you can't work on the whole tray, or we forgot to put the dough on the sides before, you can do this. We're going to lift it, dirt it with some choux, pushing slightly, and in this way during the cooking So we're going to fix the mat between the choux and the tray, and we will avoid any movements during the baking. Last thing now, when we finished working with our product, I advise you to either steam your pate choux. So, why is humidity important? This is a good vehicle for heat, so if we are damping our choux, when the push of the heat in the oven starts, the heat through humidity will emphasize the heat on the surface of the choux, stimulating it to leaven and rise. Or we can take some parchment paper, we're going to dampen it with water, and then we're going to place it just like this. Just placing it, we're not pressing anything. And this will allow a better... Okay, so we're not applying any strong pressure. Once we've done this, we're going to bake them in the oven with an open valve. If you haven't dampened, remember that on a total of 15 minutes, work with a closed valve for the first 5 minutes, because the steam that will come out during the first stage of cooking will be needed to help the choux in the growth. Only later, in the 2/3, we're going to open the valve and finish the cooking. So a total of 15-18 minutes circa, and we can work in a range of temperature around 180 degrees. If we're working with a static oven, so for example a pizza oven, we're working at a higher temperature around 200 degrees, 210 degrees for around 15 minutes. And once the choux have come out of the oven, remember to let them dry, maybe on a rack, to allow the steam to come out. From there you can use them for all the preparations that you need. And this is it with the demonstration of the pate choux.